Billionaires don't do blind dates. They do acquisitions. So when Sloane dragged her 6-year-old deaf daughter into a suffocatingly loud midtown steakhouse, she expected an hour of suffering. She didn't expect a tired single dad and a faded Henley who could speak to her daughter in perfect silent fluency. The back seat of the town car smelled like cold leather and the sterile metallic bite of dry clean silk. Sloane hated that smell. It was the scent of a 60-hour work week. Beside her, Mia sat dangerously still. The 6-year-old's small fingers traced the foggy condensation on the window, drawing jagged little mountains, erasing them with the side of her fist, and drawing them again. The heavy rumble of the engine vibrated up through the floorboards. Mia liked the vibration. She liked things she could feel. Sloane's phone buzzed in her palm. A text from her sister Chloe. "Be nice. He's a good guy. Don't eat him alive." Sloane locked the screen. She pressed her thumb against her temple, feeling the throb of an incoming migraine. The timing was catastrophic. Her regular nanny had quit that morning, a tearful, breathless resignation, ending with "She's a sweet girl, Miss Keller. But you're never here, and she needs more. The word tasted like copper in Sloane's mouth. She had built an empire in commercial real estate. She owned half the skyline they were currently driving past. But she didn't know how to give her daughter more. "We're here." The driver's voice clipped through the partition. Sloane looked at Mia. The little girl was wearing a stiff yellow dress she clearly despised. Her pink hearing aids sat tucked behind her ears, catching the streetlights. They were top of the line, imported from Switzerland. They didn't do much good in loud restaurants, but Sloane insisted on them. A visual cue to the world: be patient. The world rarely was. Sloane tapped Mia's knee twice. "Look at me." Mia turned. Her dark eyes were flat, mirroring the exact guarded expression her mother wore to board meetings. Sloane raised her hands. Her fingers felt stiff, unpracticed. She signed, "We go eat. Be good." Her syntax was clunky, functional. She didn't know the sign for "bear with me." "I'm terrified I'm failing you." She only knew the signs for "eat, sleep, good, bad, stop." Mia blinked. She signed back, a rapid flutter of small hands. Loud. "I know," Sloane said aloud, her voice tight, forgetting to sign it. She grabbed Mia's hand. Her daughter's palm was clammy. They stepped out onto the damp pavement. The air smelled of wet asphalt exhaust fumes and the sweet, cloying waft of roasted nuts from a nearby street cart. Le Chatelier stood in front of them, its brass doors polished to a mirror shine. It was Chloe's choice. The kind of restaurant where the waitstaff looked down on you if your watch costs less than a car. Sloane pushed the heavy brass door open. The atmosphere hit them instantly. It wasn't just loud. It was an aggressive wall of noise. Clinking heavy silver booming laughter from corner booths, the frantic hiss of the espresso machine. Sloane felt Mia flinch. The girl's free hand grabbed a fistful of Sloane's charcoal blazer, twisting the expensive wool. "Reservation for Keller." Sloane told the maitre d'. Her voice was a whip crack. It was the voice that closed 9-figure deals. The most a slick, pomaded man with a pinched nose looked from Sloane to the small, shrinking child clutching her leg. His gaze lingered for half a second on Mia's hearing aids. A subtle tightening of his jaw. Disapproval. Kids ruined the ambience. Disabled kids required effort. Sloane felt a spike of pure, violent adrenaline. "Is there a problem?" "Not at all, Madame Keller. Right this way." They wove through the crowded tables. The smell of searing wagyu and truffle butter hung heavy in the air. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. She was sweating under her silk blouse. She hated this. She hated Chloe for setting it up. She hated the men Chloe usually found for her private equity clones with blinding veneers who talked about their golf handicaps and looked at Mia like she was a broken accessory. They rounded a massive floral arrangement. Booth 4. Sloane braced herself for the slick suit. She prepared her opening lines. I have 50 minutes. I brought my daughter. If that's an issue, I can leave now and pay for your drinks. But the man sitting in booth 4 wasn't wearing a suit. He was looking at a battered paperback, tracing a line of text with a callous thumb. He wore a faded navy Henley, the fabric stretched tight across broad shoulders. His dark hair looked like it had been finger-combed, roughly about 3 hours ago. He didn't have a glass of overpriced Cabernet in front of him, just a black coffee. He looked up as they approached. His eyes were gray, tired crinkled at the corners, deeply observant. He didn't scramble to his feet or straighten his collar. He just closed the book. "Sloane," he said. His voice was low, carrying a slight rasp that cut right through the dining room's chaotic hum. "Dean." Sloane didn't offer her hand. She stood rigid, a barricade between him and her daughter. "Chloe didn't tell you I was bringing a +1. My nanny quit. If you want to reschedule, I won't be offended. It was a test. A blatant aggressive off-ramp. Take it she willed him. Run." Dean looked at her for a long moment. He took in the rigid posture, the defensive tilt of her chin, the way her knuckles were white where she gripped her purse. Then his gaze shifted down. Sloane tightened her grip on Mia's shoulder. She waited for the pity, the awkward head tilt, the inevitable, "Oh, poor thing." Dean didn't tilt his head. He didn't address Sloane. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the white linen tablecloth. He made sure he was directly in Mia's line of sight. He raised his hands. His movements weren't the stiff, jerky motions Sloane used. They were fluid, rhythmic, completely natural. He belonged in the language. "Hello," he signed. "My name is Dean." "What is your name?" Mia froze. The grip on Sloane's blazer loosened. The 6-year-old's eyes widened, darting from Dean's face to his hands, checking to make sure she hadn't imagined it. Sloane stopped breathing. The restaurant noise faded into a dull underwater roar. The ice in her water glass shifted with a sharp clack. Mia looked up at Sloane. A silent question. Is this a trick Sloane couldn't move? She just gave a stiff, tiny nod. Mia turned back to Dean. She raised her small, trembling hands. She signed her name, M.I.A., then a cautious addition. "Too loud here." Dean smiled. It wasn't a patronizing adult smile. It was a conspiratorial grin. He signed back, his face highly expressive, his eyebrows jumping perfectly with the grammar of the language. "I agree. Too many people chewing with their mouths open." He mimed a grotesque, exaggerated chewing motion. A sharp, breathy sound erupted from Mia. It was a laugh, a real, guttural, unself-conscious laugh. Sloane felt a physical punch to her sternum. It was a suffocating cocktail of emotions: shock, overwhelming relief, and dark and ugly at the bottom of it all, jealousy. She spent thousands on tutors, spent hours staring at flashcards until her eyes bled, and this man in a cheap shirt had just pulled a genuine laugh out of her daughter in 10 seconds. "Please sit," Dean said, looking back up at Sloane. He didn't look smug. He didn't point out what he had just done. He just slid a menu across the table. Sloane slid into the booth. The leather squeaked beneath her. She felt entirely off balance. The script she had prepared was useless. "You sign," she said. It sounded like an accusation. "I do," Dean said. He took a sip of his coffee. "My son Leo. He's 8. He was born deaf." "Oh." Sloane stared at her silverware. The heavy silver fork looked blurry for a second. She blinked hard, forcing her composure back into place. "Chloe didn't mention that." "Chloe doesn't know. I work as the foreman on the site her firm is developing on 4th Street. We talk about concrete and steel, not kids." Dean leaned back, the wood of the booth creaking. "She said you were terrifying. She told me to wear Kevlar." Sloane's jaw tightened. "I value efficiency. Most people find that terrifying." "I don't mind it." Dean's eyes flicked to Mia, who was currently staring at him with unabashed fascination. He tapped the table to get the girl's attention. "Do you like French fries?" he signed. Mia nodded vigorously. "Me too," Dean signed. "We will order all the French fries. Make the chef cry." Mia giggled again, covering her mouth with her hands. Sloane watched them. The air between them felt easy. For the first time all day, the knot in the back of Sloane's neck began to loosen. But the panic was still there. She was out of her depth. She commanded rooms of 50 men twice her age, but sitting across from a guy who smelled like faint sawdust and cheap laundry detergent. A guy who was effortlessly dismantling her daughter's walls. She felt entirely naked. A waiter materialized. "Sparkling or still, madam?" "Still," Sloane said automatically. Dean didn't look at the waiter. He looked at Sloane. "You look like you need a drink." Sloane met his gaze. The cynicism in her wanted to snap back. She wanted to reassert her dominance, to remind him of the tax bracket gap, the power dynamic. But she felt the small, warm pressure of Mia's leg leaning against hers under the table. Mia wasn't shaking anymore. Sloane exhaled. It was a long, ragged breath. "I need a double scotch. Neat." Dean gave the waiter a nod. "Make it 2. He looked back at Sloane. "So, you fired the nanny." "She quit," Sloane corrected, rubbing her temple. "Said I wasn't present enough." "Are you—" The question wasn't mean. It was incredibly direct. "I provide for her," Sloane said defensively. "I make sure she has everything she needs." Dean didn't argue. He just watched her. "Money buys good hearing aids," he said softly. "It doesn't buy the language." Sloane flinched. The words hit the tender, bruised part of her ego, the part that knew she was failing. She opened her mouth to eviscerate him, to tell him he had no idea what it took to keep the world from chewing a woman up and spitting her out. Before she could speak, Mia tugged on Dean's sleeve. "What is your favorite animal?" She signed, her eyes wide. Dean looked away from Sloane. His expression softened instantly. He raised his hands. "Shark," he signed, making a fin with his hand on his forehead. Then he pointed at Sloane, a wicked little glint in his eye. "Just like your mom." Mia looked at Sloane, then back at Dean, and burst into another fit of silent, shaking laughter. Sloane stared at the man across from her. Her armor was cracking right down the middle, and she had no idea how to stop it. The scotch arrived in heavy crystal glasses. The amber liquid sloshed against the sides, catching the dim overhead lighting. Sloane wrapped her fingers around the glass. The cold condensation was a shock to her skin. She took a swallow. It burned, going down tasting of sharp peat, old wood, and smoke. She welcomed the burn. It was something tangible to focus on besides the terrifying ease with which the man across from her was dismantling her defenses. Dean picked up his glass. He didn't swirl it or sniff it like the men she usually dated, the men who treated alcohol like a personality trait. He just drank. When he set the glass down, Sloane looked at his hands. They were broad, the knuckles thick and slightly scarred. There was a faint rim of grease or dirt permanently worked into the cuticles, no matter how hard he scrubbed. They were the hands of a man who built things from the ground up, not someone who traded paper and theoretical equity. "So," Sloane said, her voice dropping an octave, finding its usual boardroom footing, "you build buildings." "I manage the people who build them," Dean corrected. He leaned back, the booth creaking in protest. "I solve problems. Someone pours the foundation wrong, I fix it. The steel delivery is late, I yell at the supplier. It's chaotic, but at the end of the day, something physical exists that wasn't there before." Sloane ran a manicured thumbnail over a water bead on the table. "And Leo," Dean's eyes flicked to Mia. The 6-year-old was currently dissecting a massive plate of truffle fries, meticulously separating the crispy ones from the soggy ones. "Leo is 8, Dean said, his voice softening. The rasp in his tone smoothed out. "His mother left when he was 2. Said she couldn't handle the silence. It drove her crazy living in a house where the television was always on mute, where she had to tap his shoulder to get his attention. She wanted noise. She went to Vegas." Sloane felt a cold spike of something that felt dangerously like empathy. She pushed it down. Empathy was a liability. "And you stayed." "I stayed." Dean shrugged a heavy lift of broad shoulders. "It wasn't a choice. He's my kid. I spend $4,000 a month on a specialized speech therapist," Sloane said. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, a desperate need to prove her worth, to put her ledger on the table. "I bought the best hearing aids on the market. I moved to the Upper East Side so she could be in the catchment zone for the only private school with a dedicated deaf program. I worked 60 hours a week to pay for the scaffolding of her life." She stopped. Her breathing was shallow. Her chest felt tight, the silk of her blouse suddenly suffocating. She was waiting for him to validate her, to say, "You're doing great." Dean didn't say that. He looked at her, his gray eyes stripping away the CEO, the money, the defensive posture. "Duh. Scaffolding is important," Dean said quietly. "You need it to keep the building from collapsing." He leaned forward, closing the distance between them over the white linen. "But you can't live in the scaffolding, Sloane. Eventually you have to go inside the house." The words hit her like a physical blow. A hot flush crept up her neck. She opened her mouth to argue, to deploy her usual arsenal of cutting remarks, but her throat clamped shut. He wasn't attacking her. He was just stating a structural fact. Beside her, Mia let out a long, heavy sigh. Sloane looked down. The little girl had abandoned her fries. Her eyes were drooping, the adrenaline of the loud restaurant finally burning off, leaving behind pure exhaustion. Mia shifted, sliding down the leather booth until her head rested against Sloane's hip.
Sloane froze. She raised her hand, hovering awkwardly over her daughter's dark hair. She didn't know whether to stroke it or let her be.
Dean watched her hesitation. He didn't speak. He simply raised his own hand and mimed brushing hair away from a forehead, a slow, gentle motion. Sloane swallowed hard. She lowered her trembling hand and gently brushed a stray curl away from Mia's cheek. The girl's skin was incredibly warm. Mia let out a soft murmur and buried her face deeper into Sloane's blazer, her breathing evening out into the heavy rhythmic cadence of sleep. The restaurant around them was still roaring. Waiters shouted orders, glasses clinked, laughter erupted from the bar. But inside Booth 4 there was a heavy, profound silence. It wasn't the empty, terrifying silence Sloane usually felt when she was alone with her daughter. It was a shared silence. She looked back at Dean. He was watching Mia sleep, a faint, sad smile playing on his lips. "I don't know the signs," Sloane confessed. The whisper felt violently loud. The admission of failure tasted like ash. "I tried. I took a class. But the syntax, it's not English. It's a spatial language. My brain doesn't work that way. I look at flashcards and I forget them an hour later. I'm building a 50-story high-rise in Midtown and I can't ask my daughter how her day was without using a translator." Dean met her eyes. "It took me 3 years to become fluent. 3 years of looking like an idiot. Of Leo laughing at me because I accidentally signed toilet instead of thirsty." Sloane let out a choked sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. "You're a CEO," Dean said. He picked up his scotch, swirling the dregs. "You're used to being the smartest person in the room. You're used to giving an order and having it executed flawlessly. Sign language doesn't care about your tax bracket, Sloane. It demands vulnerability. You have to look stupid. You have to use your face, your body. You have to drop the armor." He took a final sip of his drink and set the glass down with a heavy thud. "You're terrified of looking stupid in front of her," he said. It wasn't a question. Sloane looked away, staring at the salt shaker. Her jaw ached from how hard she was clenching it. "I'm terrified she'll realize I'm not enough." The rain started while they were waiting for the valet. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a harsh, stinging New York downpour, slicking the pavement and turning the neon lights of the passing taxis into blurred streaks of yellow. The air smelled of wet garbage and ozone. Sloane stood under the heavy green awning of Le Chatelier, holding a sleeping Mia in her arms. Her shoulders burned from the weight. Her expensive charcoal blazer was wrinkled, stained, with a tiny patch of drool where Mia's mouth rested. She didn't care. Dean stood 2 feet away. He had his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans. The valet pulled up a massive battered black Ford F-150. A ladder rack sat on top, strapped with heavy orange bungee cords. It looked entirely out of place next to the line of sleek Mercedes and town cars. "That's me," Dean said, nodding toward the truck. Sloane's town car glided to a stop right behind it. The driver popped the back door. Sloane shifted Mia's weight, wincing as a sharp pain shot up her neck. "Thank you," she said. The words felt stiff, inadequate. "For translating." Dean pulled a crumpled paper napkin from his pocket. He clicked a cheap ballpoint pen and scribbled something against the brick wall of the restaurant. He held the napkin out to her. Sloane looked at it. The edges were fraying. A dark blue phone number was scrawled across the center. "I take Leo to Marcus Garvey Park on Saturday mornings," Dean said. The rain was blowing sideways under the awning, catching his dark hair, plastering it against his forehead. "He's the only deaf kid in his class. He gets lonely. Mia needs friends who don't need hearing aids to understand her." Sloane stared at the napkin. It was an invitation. But it wasn't a date. It was a lifeline. "I have board prep on Saturdays." She lied automatically, a defensive reflex. Dean didn't withdraw his hand. "Bring the board prep. The park has benches. The coffee across the street tastes like battery acid, but it's hot. Sloane hesitated. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She reached out and took the napkin. The paper was damp rough against her fingertips. "I'll think about it." "Sure you will." Dean offered a half smile. A real one. "Good night, Sloane." He turned and jogged to his truck, pulling his collar up against the rain. Sloane watched the taillights of the Ford disappear into the red glow of brake lights down the avenue, before she finally ducked into the sterile, leather-scented cocoon of her town car. The napkin sat on her mahogany desk for 5 days. It was an eyesore. It clashed with the minimalist high-end aesthetic of her corner office. Her assistant had tried to throw it away twice, only to be met with a death glare that sent him scurrying back to his cubicle. It was Thursday afternoon. The sky outside her floor-to-ceiling windows was a bruised, heavy purple. Sloane was staring at a quarterly projection spreadsheet, but the numbers were swimming. Her phone buzzed. A text from the temporary nanny. Mia threw her plate at the wall. "She won't stop crying. I don't know what she wants." Sloane closed her eyes. A dull, throbbing ache bloomed behind her corneas. She imagined the scene. The broken ceramic. The frustrated, isolated little girl screaming into a void that no one around her knew how to navigate. Sloane picked up her phone. She opened the translator app she had downloaded a year ago. She watched a 3D avatar perform the sign for calm down. The avatar's movements were stiff robotic, devoid of any human nuance. She slammed the phone face down on the desk. She looked at the crumpled napkin. The ink had bled slightly from the dampness of that rainy night. It looked pathetic. It looked like surrender. Sloane picked up the napkin, punched the numbers into her phone, and hit send before she could talk herself out of it. "Battery acid coffee sounds acceptable. 10 a.m., Sloane." The reply came 3 minutes later. "I'll bring the good donuts. The ones with the sprinkles." Dean Sloane let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. For the first time in a week, the knot in her stomach loosened just a fraction. Marcus Garvey Park on a Saturday morning was a chaotic, unapologetic sensory assault. The air tasted of exhaust fumes, burnt sugar from a nearby nut cart, and the damp, slightly sour smell of trampled earth. The playground itself was a tangle of primary colors and shrieking volume. Toddlers wailed. Teenagers blasted heavy bass from a portable speaker on the basketball courts, and the constant rhythmic thwack-thwack of a leather ball against the backboard vibrated through the soles of Sloane's shoes. Sloane felt entirely out of place. She had tried to dress down, settling on a slate-gray cashmere sweater and designer denim that still screamed out her tax bracket. Her Italian leather boots sank slightly into the spongy, rubberized mulch of the play area. Mia was glued to Sloane's leg, her small fingers locked into the fabric of the denim with a white-knuckled grip. The 6-year-old was scanning the chaos, her dark eyes wide, and flinching at the sudden movements of the other children. She hadn't worn her hearing aids today. Sloane had let her leave them on the dresser, a tiny, terrifying concession. "Hey!" Sloane jolted. Dean was standing by a peeling green park bench, the iron armrests rusted orange. He wore a faded flannel over a white thermal, the sleeves pushed up past his elbows, to reveal the thick cords of tendons in his forearms and a faded black ink compass tattoo. He held 2 steaming paper cups. Beside him stood a boy. He was all sharp elbows and scraped knees, wearing a slightly too large T-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it. He was missing a front tooth, and there was a smudge of dirt on his left cheek. Dean handed Sloane a cup. The thin cardboard burned her fingers instantly. "Sloane, this is Leo." Dean tapped the boy's shoulder. Leo looked up, his gray eyes a mirror image of his father's, narrowing slightly as he assessed Sloane. Then his gaze snapped to the small, shrinking girl hiding behind Sloane's leg. Leo didn't hesitate. He didn't offer a shy wave or wait for an introduction. He stepped forward, planting his worn sneakers into the mulch, and raised his hands. His movements were fast, unapologetically large and sloppy, with the boundless energy of an 8-year-old. But they were completely fluid. He used his shoulders, his eyebrows, his whole torso to communicate. "You like the swings," he signed, his eyebrows shooting up toward his messy hairline. "I can go higher than the trees." "I bet you can't." Mia peeked out from behind Sloane's leg. She stared at Leo's hands. For a long, agonizing second, Sloane held her breath. The coffee burned her palm, but she didn't shift her grip. What if Mia retreated? What if the isolation had sunk its claws in too deep and she shut down? Then slowly, Mia unclasped her fingers from Sloane's jeans. She stepped forward out of her mother's shadow. She raised her own hands. "I go higher than you. You have short legs." Leo's eyes widened in mock outrage. He threw his head back and let out a loud hooting laugh that carried zero self-consciousness. It was a raw, percussive sound. He grabbed Mia's wrist and bolted toward the swing set, dragging her into the fray of running children. Sloane watched them go. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She watched her daughter, who had thrown a ceramic plate against the kitchen wall, out of pure, unadulterated frustration. Just 2 days ago, run toward the swings, her small hands flying as she signed something back at the boy. They were communicating. They were existing in a secret 3-dimensional world that Sloane was entirely locked out of. "Nah, she's fast," Dean said. He sat down on the peeling bench, leaning back and resting his arms across the top slat. He took a sip of his coffee. "Leo usually has to slow down for the other kids. He's going to like her." "She's smart," Sloane said. Her voice came out tight-clipped. The jealousy was back. It wasn't a subtle thing. It was a bitter, ugly taste in the back of her throat, thick as tar. She hated that this boy, this stranger with dirt on his face, could give her daughter something she couldn't. She hated that Dean could sit there utterly relaxed while she felt like her skin was too tight for her bones. Dean looked up at her. He set his coffee down on the bench. The steam curled into the cold air between them. "Stop it." Sloane bristled, her corporate reflexes flaring instantly. "Stop what?" "Beating yourself up. I can hear the gears grinding in your head from here." Dean turned to face her fully, his expression stripping away any pretense. "You think because she's smiling with him, it means you're failing. You think parenting is a ledger. It's not a corporate merger, Sloane. You don't lose equity just because someone else makes her happy." "You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," Sloane snapped. The veneer finally cracked. She spun to face him, her eyes burning with a sudden violent heat. The park sounds the sirens, the basketball. The shrieking faded into a dull underwater roar. "I sit in my 6,000-square-foot apartment, and it is so quiet it makes my ears ring. I watch her play with her blocks, and I know she is locked inside her own head, and I don't have the key. I am her mother. I am supposed to be the key, and I am entirely useless to her." Her breath hitched. A single traitorous tear spilled over her lower lash line, cutting a hot, humiliating path down her cheek. She angrily swiped it away with the heel of her hand, her heavy gold bracelet clinking against her wrist. She hated crying. She despised it. It felt like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Dean didn't look away. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer a hollow platitude or tell her it was going to be okay. He just absorbed the outburst. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a clean blue shop towel. He held it out. Sloane stared at it. It was rough cotton, the kind used to wipe grease off engine parts. She took it, the fabric grating against her skin as she pressed it to her eyes. She took a shuddering, jagged breath, smelling the faint trace of motor oil on the cloth, trying to force her rigid armor back into place. "You want the key?" Dean asked quietly. Sloane lowered the towel. She didn't trust her voice, so she just gave a jerky, desperate nod. "Then you have to start laying the bricks," Dean said. He stood up, then closing the distance between them. The smell of sawdust and laundry detergent grounded her, cutting through her spiraling panic. "You have to stop trying to buy the house and start building it." He raised his hands. He held them at chest level, moving deliberately, ensuring she tracked every shift of his knuckles. "Watch," Dean instructed. He pointed his right index finger firmly at his own chest. "This is I." He held both hands out, palms facing up, fingers spread. Slowly, he pulled his hands inward toward his body, his fingers curving into tight claws. "This is want." Finally, he brought his right hand up near his forehead, forming a loose fist. He suddenly flicked his index finger straight up like a light bulb turning on. "This is understand." Sloane stared at his hands. Her own hands hung heavy at her sides, feeling stupid, clumsy, and weighed down by her expensive rings. "Try it," he urged softly. Sloane swallowed the massive lump in her throat. Slowly, she raised her hands. She felt exposed, ridiculous. She pointed an unsteady finger at her cashmere sweater. Dean nodded. "Good. Now the next one." She held her hands out. She pulled them inward, her fingers curling tight. "Want." Her nails dug slightly into her own palms. "Keep going." His voice was a low rumble, steadying her. She brought a trembling fist up near her temple. She flicked her index finger up. "Understand." "Put it together," Dean said. His gray eyes never left hers. "String the sentence. Let your face match the words." "It's not a transaction, Sloane. It's a plea." Sloane took a breath. She pointed to her chest. She pulled her hands back, fingers curling with actual visceral desperation. "Want?" She brought her fist to her head and flicked the finger up her brow, furrowing with the effort of it all. "Understand. I want to understand." "Hey," Dean said softly. Sloane looked at him. Dean wasn't looking at her anymore. He tipped his chin toward the swings. Mia had stopped swinging. The little girl was standing ankle-deep in the rubber mulch, looking across the playground directly at her mother. The 6-year-old's head was tilted, her dark eyes watchful and utterly still. Sloane's breath caught in her throat. She didn't think about her corporate image. She didn't worry about her stiff syntax or looking foolish in front of the other Upper East Side mothers who might be walking their labradoodles past the gates. She stepped away from the bench, moving out into the open space of the chaotic, noisy park. She raised her hands. She pointed to her chest. She pulled her hands toward her heart fingers, curving into claws, putting every ounce of her failure, her exhaustion, and her fierce, suffocating love into the tension of her tendons. Want. She brought her fist to her temple, flicking the finger up into the cold air. Understand. She held her hands there, shaking slightly, her eyes locked onto her daughter, across 20 yards of screaming kids and bouncing basketballs. I want to understand you. Mia stood perfectly still. The wind whipped a dark curl across her face. Slowly, the defensive flatness in the girl's eyes began to melt. A tentative, cautious smile, imperfect and missing a bottom tooth, broke across her face. She raised her small hands covered in gray playground dust. She pointed a finger at herself. She formed two fists, bumping the knuckles together twice, then pointed at Sloane. With you. Sloane let out a breath that fractured into a harsh sob. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been sitting on her chest for 3 years began to lift brick by heavy brick. It wasn't perfect. It was just 3 signs. It was a single drop in a vast, overwhelming ocean of vocabulary she still needed to master. But it was a foundation. Sloane felt a warmth radiating beside her. Dean stepped up next to her, shoving his hands casually back into the pockets of his jeans. He didn't crowd her. He just stood there, a solid, grounded mass amidst the noise blocking the wind. Your wrist was too stiff on the second sign, Dean murmured, a dry, teasing edge bleeding into his raspy voice. Sloane wiped her eyes fiercely with the back of her sleeve, a wet, genuine laugh tearing out of her throat. Shut up, Dean. Just saying. He replied, a slow, easy smile spreading across his face as he watched Leo run back over to Mia. If we're going to fix this, you're going to need a much better foreman. Sloane looked at him. At the faded flannel, the grease-stained cuticles, the gray eyes that saw right through the silk, and the money to the terrified, imperfect mother underneath. She looked back at her daughter, who was now racing Leo to the slide, her hands a blur of rapid, joyous motion. Yeah, Sloane said softly. The smell of burnt coffee and damp earth suddenly the best thing she had ever breathed in. I think I do. Will Sloane finally tear down her corporate walls and let Dean help her rebuild her relationship with Mia? This emotional journey proves that sometimes the loudest connections are made in complete silence. If this story touched your heart, please smash that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder about what truly matters, and subscribe for more grounded, powerful stories. Drop a comment. What was your favorite moment?